Welcome to the video lecture on personal selling. After all of our other marketing activities, ultimately we need to actually sell our product or service to a customer. And personal selling, human beings interacting with customers, well, there's nothing more powerful than that. A human being can answer questions, address concerns, can follow up in a way that an ad or a press release can't. So personal selling is extraordinarily important. In fact, many people who work in marketing started as salespeople. I remember at one company I worked at, there was a saying that you couldn't go anywhere if you hadn't carried the bag. What they mean is the bag of samples. If you essentially, if you, it would be very difficult to move up in the organization unless you had a sales background, at least in the marketing division that I was in. So it is extraordinarily important. And even if you're not going to work in sales, it's important to understand the sales process. For instance, if you're going to support with marketing materials and some other form of communication, it's also important to be able to make sure that your sales force is in tune with any other promotions that you are running or ads that you're running. It really can be quite disconcerting and counterproductive if you have sales representatives who are, sort of singing a different song. They're sort of out of tune with the rest. And this is why we talk about integrated marketing communications, and certainly personal sales is very much a part of that. There are, in general, two sales approaches that we can take. Transactional sales, where we focus on making a sale with a customer to achieve the maximum amount of profit on that particular sale. It is a sort of limited view. Now, if you're never going to ever see a customer again, this is probably the approach you want to take. However, in most cases, we probably want to build a relationship, and that is sort of the second approach, relationship building, where we focus on the long-term value or the lifetime value of a customer. And I believe we spoke about this in a previous lecture. The idea is that maybe occasionally you might want to leave some money on the table so you don't make your customer feel that you've really drained them, got the most out of them. You want to build a relationship and where you understand that maybe the first sale is not, hopefully you're still making profit, but you will not maximize that profit on that single sale because you want continued sales. You want to build a relationship with that customer. And we often underestimate, particularly in the age of the internet, the importance of personal relationships. There is an old expression, which I'm sure you've all heard. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And the idea is that if you know people and you have relationships with them, they will benefit you, and perhaps in the case of sales, benefit the company that you work for. So let's talk a little bit about the sales process. And this is kind of the entire sales process. Not every sales rep will do the entire thing, but it's important. People think of it as just you walk in and give a pitch. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. Of course, the first part is that you have to find customers. This is called prospecting. Looking for customers, where will you find them? And there are various approaches and various types of prospects. And these are, what's on the screen are just a few, actually primary classifications. First, we have leads. Now, leads are simply name and contact information. You can go through the phone book. You can, go through a online directory and find leads. However, that's somewhat limited because you don't really know anything about them. They are just they're just names and contact information. I do remember one time a colleague came into me and I said, "Oh, I'm really excited. I just found a great new lead." I said, "Oh, really? Tell me about it." And he was describing a new company that was moving into town. And he was all excited because he knew that it was a high value company. I said, "Okay, well, who do you know there?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know anyone there, but I said, okay, well, then you don't have a lead. You just know a company is moving into town. You don't, because ultimately it is human beings that make purchase decisions. Corporations are incapable of making decisions. It's the people in the corporation, and ultimately, if you want to sell something, you've got to find a human being to say, yes, I will buy your product or service. Next in this list, you see referrals, and referrals are much better because this is where a person, a human being, has said, hey, I know this person here who needs this service, and you sell that service or product. Or somebody comes to you and say, oh, you have a problem? I know somebody who can solve your problem. It's a third party who comes in, who makes a recommendation, who knows, at least on a basic level, both parties, and says, hey, you two will probably fit together in some way, hopefully. Not that every referral always absolutely pans out, but it's much better than a lead where you just have a name and contact information. Another source for prospecting are your current customers. Now, this may seem counterintuitive since they're already your customers, but your current customers you can get them to buy more, maybe more of the same product that you've been selling, or maybe a different product. You've introduced a new product and you want to go back to the people who are already serving, you're already serving. And of course, also past customers. Past customers are people maybe you're not doing business with right now, but you have in the past. Now, obviously, if you're not doing business with them because there has been some sort of, angst or anger, or sort of a blow up, that's a little bit different. But in many cases, customers are, simply customers that they bought from you and they just have not continued to buy for you. Maybe they don't have a need. Maybe they're not in they don't have a demand for that product right now. But you always want to keep in touch with past customers whenever possible. And as a salesperson, you always want to join organizations and do networking. And I was part of a professional network. We would have a monthly business breakfast. And I remember this woman named Judy. She was a video producer and director. And she decided for her marketing plan for that month, she was going to make a concerted effort to reach out to all her past customers, people she'd done work with before who had been satisfied with her work. And she just wanted to call them, say hello, and reconnect with them, remind them that she's still around. And the following month, we at breakfast, we met again, and I said, by the way, Judy, how did that go? Said, oh, it was great. I now have 3 new projects, which was a lot because, each project is, tens of thousands of dollars for her. And, she was a sole independent contractor. So she was very pleased with the results of that. And so you always don't want to forget past customers. There is sort of a special situation in which you could have some problems with past customers. Not necessarily that you've had a blow up with them, but this is usually with large companies and who have large sales forces. All your sales reps are not going to necessarily be with you forever. They're usually no sales rep will stay with you forever. They may retire. They could die. They could take another job somewhere. Often, what we worry about most is when a sales rep leaves and takes a job with a competitor as a sales rep, and that is always a little bit problematic. I remember years ago, I went out into the field and traveled around with a sales rep named Chris. He was very good. I could see he had great relationships with customers. And for lunch, we went to a restaurant, but we went into the back room. I have to explain that the customers for the product that he primarily sold were orange and citrus farmers, oranges, grapefruits, that sort of thing. And the product we were selling was an insecticide. And he said, we're going to go in the back room. Not many people go in back. Not many people have enough nerve to go in the back room. And this back room was where the growers, the citrus growers would eat. It was kind of not like exactly a private club, but kind of sort of. And he goes in, he waves to everybody, and and then we're sitting down to eat, and somebody calls from the other room and says, "Hey, Chris, how come you're working with a new company now?" Um, and he very quickly and boldly says, "Well, that's because I found a company that made a better product." And I thought that was great. And that he said it out so loud for all the growers, all the customers and potential customers to hear. But then it made me think, what if Chris left? What would happen? And when I got back to headquarters, I spoke to his, his superiors. I said, by the way, please make sure that Chris stays happy, because I could tell if he ever left our company, he would pull those customers away. And he pulled a lot of customers from his old company to our company. And I said, if Chris ever left and he went to a competitor, we might have some trouble. Now, one of the problems is, if regardless of how they leave or where they leave, a sales rep is a company's connection to that customer. They're the face of the company. And when they leave, let's say we have a sales rep that just retired, we have to reconnect with those customers. Now, hopefully, the company has a list of those customers. Can obviously contact information, as much information as possible, and you'll find that many modern companies will have a customer database in which the sales rep needs to list contacts, any problems, any special situations, so that if they do leave, the company has information. What you do not want is a sales rep to leave and take customer information with them. And that had happened. I remember there was a number of years ago a modeling agency in which on a late Friday night, 3 of the employees of the modeling agency got all the files in the agency, took them out of the agency, and over the weekend signed up all the models at their new agency. Now, this is completely illegal, obviously unethical, and I would hope that no one would ever try to do that. And this is why lawyers have come up with non-compete agreements and things like that. In this particular case, and this was a pre-digital situation where everything was on paper, that was really, actually it was quite criminal. But you don't want that sort of thing to happen to any degree. And so it's responsibility. First off, there's an ethical responsibility to maintain that information for the company, so the company can get it. Also, it's smart that a company would make sure sales reps fed them the information. So if they leave, something happened and they got hit by a truck or something, the company could reconnect with those customers as quickly as possible. Because also, it is not unheard of when a sales rep leaves for a competitive company to see that as an opportunity and swoop in and try to move customers to their company and their products. So, and there are people who will spend their entire time prospecting. And one of my former students actually for a telephone company became a prospector. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So anyway, after we've prospected, we also need to qualify these prospects. Is every person on your list a good prospect? Are they likely to buy? Are they, what's the likelihood of them actually, making purchases? And we want to use something called the MAD criteria. And MAD stands for money. Does the customer or potential customer have enough money to buy your product? Does the person you're speaking to have the authority to make the purchase? Why end up speaking to somebody in the company who can't make the purchase? And would they have a desire? Would they demand the product? Some people actually use the MAD criteria using the word demand. So either way is fine. But the point is, you want to not waste your time with a company or a customer that doesn't have the money, or an individual who doesn't have the authority to make a purchase, or just can't use your product. I had a former student who who left. She graduated, and a year later she came by to say hello, and she happened to be in a sales position. But what her job was simply to call up companies. As I said, she worked for a telecommunications company. She'd call up the company and ask two questions. The first was, may I speak to the person who makes the decisions about choosing the phone service? And she'd get to that person. She's looking for the person who has the authority to buy their phone service. And then the next question she would ask is, do you currently pay more than $200 a month for your phone service? If the answer was no, we pay less, then she'd say thank you very much, and she wouldn't bother these people anymore because they're not going to have they're already getting a really good deal on their. She was calling businesses, not homes. If they did pay more than 200, she would say, oh well, we can do it better. In fact, I'd like to make an appointment for a sales rep to come and see you. And so her involvement would end at that point. So essentially, she was setting appointments, but she would first qualify the customers, see if they, first off, if they paid more than $200 for their phone bill, they had the money. And if they did, they probably have a desire for a cheaper phone service. So, next, once you know that your customer you want to go after, you probably want to do some pre-approach planning. This is where you try to learn as much about a customer as possible. Check their website. If it's a referral, ask that person referring as much as you can about that person, as much as they know. And you sort of plan how you're going to go forward. For instance, what features or benefits do you think that customer might be interested in, and plan your presentation accordingly. Then you make the approach, and this again is very much about personal interactions. Human beings, how do they interact? Sometimes it's things as simple as making a handshake, shaking hands. I used to teach a sales class where I would actually have the students do a handshake drill. Come up and just say hello to me. Look me in the eye and shake my hand. And people get, it's amazing the variation in handshakes. And I'm sure you've experienced some of these. Some people give you sort of the dead fish handshake. It's just they put out their hand, they don't do anything with it, or the almost dead fish handshake. The bone crusher, somebody try, they like to squeeze it. That's a really stupid thing to do because you're challenging that person. I had somebody give me the whip once. It was like, and I actually, this person hurt my shoulder. He was a young man, very muscular, and he gave me this whip, and it's like, oh man. I actually knew somebody else who would always shake hands like this. He would put his hand up like this. This is called getting the upper hand, which meant you had to shake the hand, you had to knuckle under. That's actually where you get the term knuckling under. And I was friends with this guy, and we all, part of a large group of friends, and we actually made a decision. We were going to teach this guy, his name was Chuck, how to shake hands. And we would grab his hand with two hands and turn it. So, Chuck, this is the way you shake hands, not this way. And he eventually learned. I had one student, he wasn't the most mature, and he'd walk up to me in these handshake drills and go, hey, Mr. Bell, how you doing? And he'd slap my hand. And it hurt. I said, no, that's not how you do it. Oh, no, I want to make an impression. He was determined that he knew how to do it. And I have to admit, the class helped me convince him that was really a stupid thing to do. And we finally taught him how to shake hands. If you meet a customer and you do something like that, you're probably dead in the water at that point. But how do you greet somebody? It's very much about human interaction. How do you dress? Grooming, things like that. Very much personal interaction. Essentially, somebody will judge you, make an initial judgment about you in the first 7 seconds they meet you. And you, as the saying goes, you only get one chance to make a first impression. It's not that you can't overcome it, but why should you have to overcome it? Make a good impression right out of the box. So eventually you'll get into selling. It could be a presentation, maybe a PowerPoint, or a demonstration of some sort. Just as likely, it's going to be a discussion, you talking to somebody, um, asking them questions. One of the keys of a good sales rep is learning to ask questions. I always found the best sales reps asked more questions than made statements. They'd ask questions so they get a sense of the customer, and then they knew exactly what to say to the customer because they know they've read the customer. They know what the customer is looking for, and maybe knowing what they're not looking for. Why, pitch a certain benefit that they're not looking for. And so I've seen some great sales reps cut to it, ask a few questions, and get right down to what the customer wants. So, and and listen, there are. We're not really going to go into making great PowerPoint presentations here, but making a good PowerPoint presentation is another skill that you should develop. I find a lot of, at least at the student level, a lot of PowerPoints are a little bit lacking. They try to overstuff or put in a lot of decoration into their PowerPoint slides. If you notice, my PowerPoint slides are very basic. They're not, they have a very clean background. Don't overwhelm people with graphics. If you feel, and I know people will say, oh, well, I need to put stuff in to make it interesting. If, graphics and clip art and things like that. I hate clip art. It's a waste of time. I mean, if you're making presentations for children, that's a little bit different, but, communicate directly. If you have to do all that stuff, then maybe your presentation isn't really focused. Focus on the benefits. Focus on what is important to the customer, and forget all the fancy, stuff. I know in PowerPoint there's a lot of things like clip art and these themes. I'm not a big fan of the themes either because they're usually very heavy graphically, and they kind of get in the way of the presentation, I found. We could have a long discussion about that, but we probably don't really have the time now. You also will want to maybe handle objections. Actually, not maybe, you will want to handle any objections, any concerns that come up. And this is the power of a personal presentation. Even if it's just a discussion, you figure out what customers are looking for and maybe what they're concerned about, what they're concerned, afraid of. And you handle them and you answer those. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. And then you want to do something called a trial close. And this is something that has to be subtle. You're going to test before you ask for the sale. Kind of test how close they are. And I remember I was working with one team. We were selling we were putting together a proposal and about creating a customized software for a particular company. It had a whole range of products, and it was essentially going to be a sales tool. And we, at the end of the second meeting, and often the sales process doesn't all happen in one meeting. Often you'll have to come back. It depends upon your product. And I was thinking, we're going pretty well. Let me subtly do a trial close. So I had brought some perspective diagrams of what the graphic user interface, how it would appear on the screen for the software. And I show this as, give me your feedback here. And the prospect said, I don't know that we're ready to discuss that. And I realized at that point there was some problem. There was something that we had missed. And turns out they weren't completely sure that they wanted a piece of software. We were thinking of like the software to go on their sales reps' computers. And it turns out they really, and they didn't know this themselves, but they finally realized they wanted a website, basically an e-commerce website, which was not what we were selling at that point. And later after the meeting, I talked with the people I was working with. I said, this customer doesn't really want what we're offering. Let's not waste any more time with them. And they, they did a few follow-up phone calls, but essentially they came to the same conclusion. Don't waste time on customers who are not going to buy. Your time is valuable. We'll talk a little bit more about that too later on. And then finally, you do want to close the sale. I have actually seen sales reps, they're so nervous, they're afraid to actually, ask for the sale. Can I put you down for one? Take the order. And you have to do that. And there are some different ideas about how to do that. I'm not a big believer in high pressure because ultimately that hurts the long-term relationship. And, but ultimately we have to close the sale. And of course, the last part is, and I think we've mentioned this before, there's follow-up, particularly if you want a long-term relationship. And I've had this happen. I bought a car one time and, the following week, the sales rep is calling me. How do you like the car? Is it still working for you? He already had the money. The check cleared, that was that. He had it. There was no returns, but he's still, because he wants me to come there the next time I want to buy a car, which won't be for quite a while, but, and actually there's kind of a point of talking about transactional versus relationship. It would be very tempting to just, in something like a car, which is infrequently purchased, to focus on, just maximizing the purchase and not worrying about the relationship. Of course, I won't be buying a car too soon, but my wife might be. So maybe we'll go back there. We'll see. Okay, and this is sort of an overview of the process. Not everyone will handle the entire process. Maybe there might not be a lot of pre-approach planning. In some cases, like somebody who works in a store, obviously you're not going to do any prospecting or even qualifying. They're going to come in, and they qualify themselves by coming in. Of course, admittedly, there are shoppers who are just window shoppers, and they'll look at a lot of stuff and never buy. And you have to learn how to figure those things out as well. So I mentioned handling objections, and if you want to be a good salesperson, you do need to handle objections. And many objections, and by objections I don't mean that I object to the product. It's just they have a concern. And many customers don't necessarily verbalize that concern or objection. And so there are some people who foolishly think, well, let's let sleeping dogs lie. But that sleeping dog, that unspoken concern or unspoken objection, actually can prevent the purchase from going through. So you want to uncover it, you want to dig it out and address it accordingly. There are generally 4 types of objections. The first is the misconception, where a customer or a prospect doesn't completely understand the product. Either they don't realize it does something they want, or even worse, they think it does something that the product doesn't do. And there's a temptation to try to let that misconception go, but then what you're going to get is a lot of anger later on. Forget a relationship. If you sell a product and oversell it and let the customer think that the product does something that it doesn't, they're going to be very angry later on. And they're going to tell people, they're going to tell other prospects, and forget about any referrals. That's not going to happen. So if there's a misconception, you need to clarify it either way, whether it's been oversold or undersold. It's important to make sure your customer knows exactly what they're getting. And they'll thank you for that. I mean, particularly if they think it does something it doesn't, and they kind of pull back. And a sales rep who says, no, I don't want you to think it does something it doesn't, gets the respect of the customer. Gets respect of, I think, you and I think, would all respect that kind of person. Skepticism. The customer just doesn't believe. Just doesn't believe it does something. It's not, it's too good to be true, that kind of attitude. And in that case, you need to prove whatever the product claim is. Now, you don't have to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is not a courtroom. But you just have to prove it to their satisfaction. How can you do that? Well, you could do it with a demonstration, demonstrate the product. Now, not all products can be demonstrated. Try demonstrating vitamins. You just can't. Um, so in many cases, what you might do is refer to testimonials, get testimonials from other people who swear by the product, said it worked for them, or maybe show a study, um, or some other way of proving to the customer that what you're claiming about the product is true. Sometimes there are real drawbacks to a product. Probably the most common drawback is the price. Everyone complains about the price. Um, and and that's why I tell people in your sales pitch, never start with the price. Get the customer to love your product first, and then tell them the price. There may be some sticker shock, or maybe they're shocked that it doesn't cost more. Whatever it is, get them to love the product first, before you start talking about the price. Whatever if it's price or something else, you need to show the value of the product. Why is it worth what you're paying? And there's sometimes a concern to the thing that in the face of a price objection, you should just drop the price. That is unfortunate. If actually a customer complains about the price, that's not completely a bad thing. I'll give you an example of this. My grandfather the same house for nearly, I think, over 70 years. I think briefly, maybe a couple of years. She married my grandfather. A lot had to do with the Depression. People lived in the same house, different parts of families. When my grandparents were 70 years old, they decided that they had to move out. It was a thin house, but it had 4 floors, going up and down the stairs, and there were other reasons that they needed to move out and to simplify, downsize a bit. And my grandfather had neither one of them, my grandmother or my grandfather, had never actually been involved in a real estate transaction. This house had been the property of my great-grandparents. They had never bought a house or sold a house, and now they're selling a house at 70. And my grandfather in particular, it was a very harrowing experience, because first off, you have people walking in your house and looking around, people, strangers. There was that. But then they would do things like look around and say, "Oh, it's a lovely house. It just costs so much," and that would drive him nuts. So he'd call up the real estate woman and say, "We got to drop the price of the house." Everyone who comes in complains about the price of the house, and the lady at the real estate agency would say, "Mr. Bale, calm down, relax." They wouldn't complain about the price unless they liked the house. If they didn't like the house, they wouldn't give a damn about the price, and that sort of calmed him down a little bit. But that's actually quite true. It's not always as simple as that, however. I worked on another product that was actually quite expensive relative to the competitors. It was a very good product. It had a very high efficacy. It was actually a product that was used on livestock, and its efficacy was head and shoulders above all the competitors. To get the same amount of efficacy, of benefit, you would actually have to use 3 of the competitors' products. And guess what? Our product was still more expensive than those 3 put together. And so that was kind of a hard sell. We were selling a premium product at a premium price. And so how could we show value here? Well, we pointed out to them that if you use 3 different products, you're using 3 times the labor. You've got to treat them once, treat them twice, treat them 3 times. And that means more hours. And so once you calculated labor into that calculation, added to the calculation, then our product had value. It was very, very efficacious. It was a pharmaceutical product. It was did its job, and it was cheaper than using the 3 other products when you included labor. So you always had to figure out, how can you show value? How is your product offering, better than the competitors? How is it worth the price? And you must always be able to justify the price. If you can't, then your customers will walk away. The last is, of course, a real problem. And by a real problem, it could be all sorts of things. It could be maybe there was a product failure in the past. Maybe there was a service problem. Maybe product didn't show up at the right time. Whatever it is. Maybe somebody was rude. It could be anything. So it's a real problem. This is the most difficult one to deal with. And I don't have a nice, neat solution for you here. But you will have to show some sort of action. You'll have to go above and beyond. This is where something went bad. Something bad happened. It didn't, and the customer is unhappy. So you have to do something special to make them happy again. Kind of like life. Anyway, moving ahead. There are various types of sales jobs. There are order takers. Think of these as, and there are various types of order takers. They may be somebody you simply call on the phone and say, I'd like to order. I'd like to order a pizza. That could be an order taker. Or somebody in a store, a counter clerk in a store who maybe customers come in and they say, could I see that? Looking into a counter, to a display case, and you pull it out and you show it to them. And maybe the counter clerk has some knowledge of the product, maybe not, but they're there just to take the orders. That's a simpler type of sales rep. It doesn't require as much training, easier to supervise. And we also have new business salespeople. These are prospectors. I gave you an example of my former student who worked for a telecommunications provider, just qualifying. But a new business salesperson could do a lot more than just qualifying. And these are people who are beating the bushes. They are prospecting. They're trying to find customers and build more business. Whereas the order taker is not really going out and getting new business. The new business is the business that's just coming in automatically. You will also have many sales reps who are relationship managers. They have ongoing relationships where the customer is maybe a business customer or another type of customer who's buying on an ongoing basis, and you want to maintain this relationship. As we said previously, it costs 5 to 10 times more to get a new customer than it is to keep a current one happy. Sometimes you'll have a variation of this called the key accounts manager. I knew sales reps, they would have hundreds of customers they would go out and visit with. I knew a key accounts manager who only had 14, but they were the 14 largest accounts they had. And they required a special touch. They required a lot of hand-holding and relationship building and so forth. You occasionally will have technical specialists, and these may not be technically sales representatives, but they are in some way, but they are there to promote the sales of the product. And again, if you can think if you're in the computer industry or the pharmaceutical industry or any industry that has complex products where a customer may need help understanding product. Maybe there's a problem with the product. Let's say I'm sure a good example of this would be maybe people from General Electric who are servicing or serving customers, let's say hospitals. They buy their CAT scanners and other types of X-ray equipment, and they may have technical questions. When do we have to change the bulb? And as opposed to just bothering sales reps who may not be as technically proficient. And so this is, they kind of technical specialists will generally work hand in hand with the sales representatives, professional sales representatives. So as you can see, we have like people who are very simple order takers, and then people who are more complex, dealing with more complex relationships. And there's probably, you could put up some more categories. I think the textbook has some other categories, but they're kind of very similar to these 4 categories. In addition, you have inside and outside sales. By that I mean an inside sales representative is somebody who will probably never go into the field. or very rarely. They work the phones. An example of that would be telemarketers, but they're not all telemarketers. For instance, my wife worked on inside Salesforce, and she covered um, certain territory, and she would call. And these were often she was responding. In some cases, she was an order taker. She was responding to people who had gone to the website and said, I need some replacement product and help." And she would call them, and she would get the order that way. An outside sales rep is probably more of what you would think about as a sales rep. Some of the people the new business salesperson or the relationship manager, they will go out into the field and visit the customer. The professional sales rep is usually somebody who works out of their home. They may have a company car, and they schedule appointments and go out and meet with customers. So, and then you also have team selling. And I've kind of already alluded to this with when talking about the technical specialist. You might work with various people, sales reps and technical specialists working together. Maybe there be maybe multiple technical specialists, depending upon the type and complexity of the product. But also, some sales are larger and maybe require somebody from senior management to come in if it's a huge contract. If it's a huge contract, if I'm representing a company, a customer, and I'm talking about a major contract, I don't want to just talk with the lowest level sales rep. I probably want to talk with a sales manager or director, or maybe somebody even higher for bigger. So the bigger the deal, the higher in the management level the customer will probably want to meet. Particularly if it's going to be an important ongoing relationship. So you will often see team selling, where the sales rep at the bottom kind of keeps their finger on the pulse, and when there's an issue, it could be a problem or an opportunity, they bring in the senior people who can speak with greater authority. So sales are generally not that simple. Often they're actually very complex, especially when you get on a large scale. So. Sales managers, of course, have all sorts of decisions that they need to make. The first is, who should our sales reps be? How do we select our sales reps? Now, when you're selecting a sales rep, you're looking for various qualities in an individual. It may be some level of expertise. Now, some sales reps require a lot of expertise, some not so much. So, for instance, if you go into an expensive jewelry store, you'll want a sales rep who can understand about clarity and color and diamonds and cuts and things like that, and be able to speak intelligently about that. If it's a pharmaceutical company, you want somebody who understands biology and understands the pharmaceutical industry. And now, obviously, these will still require training, but somebody who is doing that. Now, there are other sales reps. It depends upon the customer. I knew one sales rep. He was, at the time I met him, he was selling saddles and horse blankets for a company, manufacturer of those products. And he said 2 years before he was selling nurses' uniforms. And those don't really require a lot of expertise. I'm not saying there isn't knowledge that you need, but a lot of it can be picked up fairly easily. I worked with one sales force, actually, that almost every member of the sales force had a PhD. And the few that didn't also, however, were still very knowledgeable of the field. That's very rare. It was a very small elite sales force. So the question is, what level of expertise do you need? So, if you're selling for a computer company, you want somebody who knows what a hard drive is, at the very least. So. There's also issues of personality. Again, we talked about this is a human interaction. You want to have a good personality. Somebody who is outgoing, but not obnoxious. And I'm sure you've met people who are outgoing, but they're really obnoxious, and you want to get away from that person. So you want somebody who is empathetic, somebody who can listen. I've mentioned the best sales reps know how to ask questions and then listen to the answers. And I think I gave a story of this previously of the sales rep who, when I went to buy a new car, just started vomiting all the features at me, regurgitating everything he knew about the technical aspects of the car, even though I wasn't interested. And we made sure we never, I was never going to buy from that sales rep. Um, I mean, I'm sure technically he was competent, but I just didn't like this guy because he didn't care about me. He just wanted to regurgitate the techno babble. So um, also, you want people who are motivated, and there are a lot of people who are motivated. Some people refer to it as being hungry. I do remember this. We were looking to hire some sales reps at one company, and I was asked to be part of the interview process. And I remember this one gentleman. He was slightly older, and that was absolutely fine. He was retired from the U.S. military. Great. He would have discipline. He had a great personality. Um, he certainly had enough expertise. But I don't think we needed a high level of expertise, but he was more than sufficient on that. And he made it one comment and said, "Hey, yeah, I don't really need this job, but I just want to see if I can do it." And we liked him, but he wasn't really hungry enough. He didn't need the job. You know, um, if it worked out for him, great. If it didn't, you know, and I mean, and luckily we had other options. We had other people who were had sufficient expertise, had good personalities, but were a little bit hungrier, a little bit more motivated. So we chose one of them. And so you want to look for these qualities in a sales force, the sales representatives. Uh, Regardless of the level of expertise, there will have to be some sales training. Uh, it might be, um, it might be, or how do you file an expense report? That's sort of administrative training. Any technical training on the product, I don't care, unless you're already in the industry and you're maybe teaching, maybe you're selling a very similar product at another company. Almost everyone will need product training. And it may be more than just the actual product. Maybe it might be the field a little bit, but also sales training itself. How do you sell a product? The best sales reps, as I said, ask questions. Um, they ask open-ended questions. The worst question, I've done a little bit of sales training. The worst question to ask is, "Can I help you?" Because if a customer is nervous, they're going to say no, and then you're stuck. You asked if you could help them, and they said no. It's very difficult to get past that. So I never ask that question, and I do a lot of work with trade shows, or at least I used to. No, I still do some work with trade shows, and I try to teach people not to say that. And what I would say is, "How can I help you today?" You can't answer yes or no to that question. Or if I'm at a book sale, I do book festivals. What do you like to read? Um, and when they tell me what they like to read, then I can try to, sell them something along the lines of what they want to read. It helps if you have a range of products there to do, in this case, a range of books. And you learn that sort of thing. There was something once called the Xerox method. And I think it was just somebody at Xerox came up with this idea. It was sort of how they thought products should be sold. And it was um, a very verbal, constant talking kind of approach. And that puts a lot of people off. And that has been kind of cast aside now. And it's much more a market orientation type of approach. Well, what do you need? That sort of thing. And learning how to do that. And what was interesting in the sales training sessions that I often work with, I would work with sales people who had been selling a long time, and they used these old methods, and it was very difficult to get them to turn around, very difficult to get them to change their methods because they felt it had worked for them, even though, to be quite honest, customers have become more sophisticated. Um, there are more choices. Most customers can walk away from you and your product and find an alternative. That's the competitive environment that we live in. Another thing we have to do is design territories. Now, imagine for a moment that the entire world consists of New Jersey. Nothing's beyond it. And you and I and everyone else in the class is part of a sales team. And if we can go anywhere in the state that we want, we're going to go where, let's say it's a luxury product. We're going to go where the high net worth individuals are. So we're going to head to Bergen County, or maybe secondarily to certain parts of Morris County, maybe down towards Haddonfield. This is, where might be the most potent place to sell. But then other counties are going to be ignored. And in those high potential areas, we're going to get in each other's way. So it's important to establish territories, limits, borders between us, so we don't end up conflicting with each other. We don't end up competing with each other. That can lead to problems, and that's it can be very important. Also, make sure that you have coverage. So no one's being ignored. Now, the geographic territories doesn't mean equally in terms of geography. It should be divided equally in terms of the customer potential. Think of, in fact, I remember this working with the National Sales Force. Montana had the representative. There was one representative for Montana. Montana is a very big state, yet there were 5 representatives for Manhattan, which is a small island. But if you look at the populations, they are. I think there are more people in Manhattan than there are in Montana. I'm not sure, but you understand there's a difference in population density. So it's not that every territory should be geographically equal. It's that they should have equal sales potential. You're never going to achieve that perfectly, but it happens. But you want to give every sales rep a shot. Now, territories generally are geographic. And as a rule, a sales rep should never try to sell outside their geographic territory. Now, occasionally there are disputes. For instance, I remember this one sales rep had worked very hard to get this customer. It was a retail customer to sell their product, and she did a fantastic job. They became a big seller, and then this customer moved their store, and they moved their store across into a different sales territory. Now, the store had no idea they were doing this. It wasn't like a state line or anything, but there was a dispute then. That one sales rep saying, "Hey, I worked really hard to get this customer. They're now a good customer of ours. They're buying on an ongoing basis, and now that's been moved into another territory. So where another sales rep would get the benefit of all of that work." So obviously, you have to look at these things carefully. There was another situation where I knew a sales rep in Colorado, and there was a trade show in Denver, which this sales rep thought would be a good opportunity to meet customers and prospect and answer questions and so forth. So he spent some money for a booth, and he set up a display, and he was interacting with customers, not so much making sales, but answering questions, building up the brand, that sort of thing. And he was having a discussion with one customer, or potential customer anyway, and he said, and they were discussing some technical aspects of the product. And then the customer said, "Well, wait a minute. That's not what Dr. Day said." And he's going, "Well, who's Dr. Day?" "Well, he's the other guy who's selling your product, over on aisle 2. He said, "Really, there should be nobody else here selling this product." And so he closed his booth and went over to aisle 2 at the trade show and discovered that it was another sales rep from his company. The trouble is that sales rep, his name was Leon, was actually from Kentucky, who I guess doesn't look like he was going to meet his sales quota, and heard about this trade show and flew out to Denver and to try to sell product there. That's a no-no. That's forbidden. in any company. I can't imagine any company tolerating that. The sales rep in Denver called his district manager and told him what was going on. The district manager called the regional director. They were actually because one was in Kentucky, one was in Colorado. They were in different regions. And they had different reporting relationships, but while this was all going on, this sales rep also called his fellow sales reps and said, "You would not believe what this guy Leon has done." And they all knew Leon. The sales reps knew each other, and there was a universal call among all the sales reps to fire this guy Leon because he had violated the golden rule. Thou shalt never go into another sales rep's territory, because that's essentially eating into their sales, perhaps hurting their commissions, or at least hurting their ability to achieve their sales targets. So you have to have very clear borders and very clear rules about how that works. Now, generally, when we think of sales territories, we think of them in terms of geography, but you could also think of them in some other terms in addition, such as the product line that is being sold. I worked for one company that sold over 1,000 products. There's no way one person could be proficient in selling 1,000 different products, and they were diverse products as well. And so what we did is we divided our product lines into 4 categories, and that made it much easier to sell. And also, certain products tended to only sell in certain geographic areas, so that made it easier as well. Think about General Electric. They sell train locomotives. They sell airplane engines. They sell medical scanners, CAT scanners and X-ray machines. They sell a whole range of other products. You can't imagine one sales rep trying to sell all those different things. So for every product area or line, they have sales reps who will, they'll be knowledgeable about railroads or aircraft, and they will sell accordingly. So there'll be no overlap in there. In addition, you might divide up sales responsibilities by customer type. I mentioned a moment ago that my wife was an inside sales rep at one point. She actually originally was a microbiologist working at a pharmaceutical company. She left the pharmaceutical company and ended up working at a company that sold laboratory equipment supplies, tubes and filters and all sorts of stuff that I don't really understand. But she her geographic territory was the East Coast, the Eastern Seaboard. It was clear what her product line was. She knew her product line, but she would own, and the person next to her in the next cubicle sold the same products in the same geographic territory, but they didn't overlap because they were differentiated by the customer type that they sold to. My wife, who came from the pharmaceutical industry, only sold to pharmaceutical companies. The gentleman next to her had come from the university environment, university science departments, that sort of thing, and he would only call on universities. And he understood that environment too. You may think, well, it's not much of a difference, but there are different funding processes, different schedules, different calendars, different procurement methods. So it was a different cultures, essentially. So my wife focused on the pharmaceutical industry while her colleague focused on the university research departments. And it worked out quite well. So you do need to delineate territories, whether it's geographic or by product or by customer type. Okay. In addition, you have to compensate these sales reps, and that's why we don't use sales reps for everything, because they cost money, and there are different levels and there are different types of compensation. And we'll talk more about that in a moment, so I'm going to move on for now. Also, there are issues, again, these are management issues. How do you supervise a sales rep? Well, if you're supervising counter clerks in a store, that's fairly easy. You can observe them, visually and in person, and you can evaluate them that way. Um, However, for professional sales reps, who I said many of whom work out of their homes, who travel on the road, um, how do you evaluate them? Well, I mean, you can supervise them a little bit in person. Often sales managers or directors will ride around with their sales reps to meet customers and get a sense of how well their sales reps are doing. But you can't do that, all the time. So the most important evaluation is how much do they sell, and how do they sell? I mean, do they sell a little bit to a lot of different customers, or do they sell a little bit to a few customers? How do they do it? Ultimately, the sales figures are the metric that you use. And you also need to motivate these people. Now, obviously, people are motivated by their compensation, but if you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it isn't just compensation. People have egos; they want status symbols, and those are good motivation tools as well. Um, in addition to financial compensation, which I'll talk about in a minute, we also did things like we had something called the Circle of Excellence at a company I worked for. The Circle of Excellence, we would have two national sales meetings a year. The one in January was the key one. That was, I think, 4 days, where the other one was like a day or two. This is at the beginning of the year. We're setting the tone for the year. There is technical training. There's all sorts of other types of activities. But we would also have an evening dinner. It was a ceremony. It was called the Circle of Excellence. To be made a Circle of Excellence member, you had to meet your sales quota at the very least, but only 10% of the sales force was allowed to be in the Circle of Excellence at any one time, any one year. In addition, they had to do other things, and this came down to creativity. What did they do? For instance, I remember one sales rep, he learned that a competitor was going to endorse a competitor's product. So before that, he invited them to one of his product meetings, where he met with customers, and that kind of took the air out of the sales of the competitor, because if this guy was going to go to any product meeting, any product promotional event, it just didn't have the same impact. Acquiring new customers, that was another criteria that was looked at. So. And it's kind of a big deal. It was the evening was, we all had to get dressed up. Many of the women wore, I was amazed that I figured some of the women would wear business suits. Many of the women wore gowns. It was a big deal to win this. And there was admittedly a little financial bonus attached to it that was separate from any other thing. The week after they got home, after the meeting, they would be invited to headquarters, and they would be treated like valued consultants. And I think what we also took them into New York to a play and to a dinner. We also, we really made them feel special. And it was a big deal. In fact, they would put on their business cards, they would be allowed to have new business cards printed up with Circle of Excellence on the card, that only sales reps who had been in the Circle of Excellence were allowed to do. And that was a status thing. And so a lot of sales reps aspired to do that, and they were enormously happy when they achieved that. And that certainly motivated them. And so that was a great thing. We talked a moment ago about financial compensation, so let's get into that in more detail. Look at compensation is straight salary. And in sales, if we have a straight salary, that means compensation is set at a certain level. Now, by salary, it could be wages, it could be an hourly wage, but the idea is you're trading time for dollars. no matter what your sales are, you get the same amount of money. Now, obviously, if you don't sell anything, maybe your employment might be reconsidered. But the point is, there is not a lot of additional compensation. Now, this might be, based on your performance. Now, this might be perfectly fine for somebody who works in a retail store who just is an order taker. Their performance is often based on, people coming into the store. For instance, if it's rainy or snowy, not many people are going to come in. They can't do much about that. So, and also in other cases, it is illegal to compensate certain sales reps for sales performance. One example of that would be with colleges and universities. The admissions department at a college is essentially a sales department. They are trying to get people, students, interested in coming to their school. So why are they prohibited from receiving commissions? And we're going to be talking about commissions. Well, the reason is that there are certain standards in which students may, for instance, to go into college, you need to have a high school degree. You need to have, in many colleges, they look at your grades. And also you need to speak English, at least in the United States. And I've actually seen, I was at one college, unfortunately, there was an admissions department that was not the most ethical. And I remember having one student who barely spoke English. And I think a couple times they let some people in who didn't have high school diplomas. Now, there are of course, special programs where high school students come into college. That's not what I'm talking about. And the point is, if there were commissions, there would be a lot more of this unethical behavior. I do remember at this one college, they weren't allowed to give commissions, but they did give prizes and gifts to sales reps who performed well. And I remember there was one particular case where there was a student who was confined to a wheelchair, and her problem was transportation. She was worried about she couldn't get to school, and how would she get home? And this admissions rep said, "Don't worry, no, don't worry. We'll pick you up in time for class, and then when class is over, our van will take you home." The trouble is, there was no such van. He just made this up, which I could not believe. This is not this school. Please don't think it is. That admissions rep was fired, and there was a reevaluation of the entire department after that incident. The student, she was refunded all her money, and with an apology, and it was incredibly stupid. And actually, the response of this admissions rep was, "It's my job to bring them in. It's your job to keep them." I think that line alone got him fired. So those are the reasons for having a straight salary. Either the performance of the sales rep is not as critical, or it's a situation where commissions are illegal or unethical. Obviously, we are all familiar with the concept of straight commission, where there is a direct correlation between sales performance and compensation. Many real estate people work on this sort of situation. They get a specific commission. Usually, an individual, even though the commission is 6%, the individual real estate sales rep usually only gets 1.5%. 1.5% goes to the other broker, and the brokerages keep each 1.5%, and then the individual, they call them broker, but their sales reps gets 1.5%. But still, their performance is how they are compensated. Most people tend not to like straight commission because it's not particularly secure. I mean, what if for reasons that have nothing to do with the sales rep's abilities, there are no sales occurring because of external environmental forces. The sales have dropped for many products during this pandemic. That's not the fault of a sales rep. That's an external force. It's like trying to sell ice cream outside when it's raining or it's snowing. It's just not, it has nothing to do with the performance of the capabilities of the sales rep. Um, so this is not always secure. People don't feel that secure, and most people do not want to work on straight commission. There is something where some companies will give their sales reps on straight commission in advance. They call this a draw. It's against future sales. The problem is if you don't make those future sales, it can be somewhat problematic. So one way to deal with this is to have a different situation where you have salary plus commission. The salary level is lower. It's not a full salary, but you have commission on top of that. Now, the commission rate would not be as rich as if it was straight salary. So there is still motivation to sell more. So sales performance is rewarded, but it's more secure. You have the security of a straight salary, and this is much more preferable for most people than a straight commission situation. And I know a number of companies that do this or variations of this. What do I mean by variations of this? Well, some companies will say, wait a minute, to sell our product, it's very easy to sell our product to a certain level, you know. And so what they have a salary and they pick a minimum sales target. And up to that point, you receive no commission. If you sell that much, great. But once you sell past that point, that's when the commissions start kicking in. Because we talked previously about occasionally a sales territory being abandoned, somebody retires or something. That doesn't mean sales necessarily stop there. You will get sales just because there's demand for the product, and not necessarily because of the salesmanship of the individual sales rep. So this is, and actually I know a number of companies that do this as well. So, you get minimum sales, that's great, but you're not going to get a lot in the way of commissions. Because human beings like to make things a little bit more complicated. Again, salary, but we have different targets. We go there and then we set another sales target. And what happens after that sales target? Well, the commission gets better and better, richer and richer. So it always gives the sales rep something better to shoot for. Even if they've achieved the first target or the second target, there's something even better around the corner. So if you really push hard, and that's great. I know one or two companies that do this. There are probably a fair amount who do this as well. Now, one of the problems with having very competitive sales forces is that occasionally you need them to do other things. For instance, you can imagine this situation. We're all in a sales force, and I'm your sales manager, and we've got a new sales rep here. His name is Bob. And I ask you to take Bob under your wing, show him the ropes, show him how to do things, show him how to be a good, teach him how to be a good salesperson. Well, a lot of you might not be particularly interested in doing that because that's going to take up time and that is going to take away from your selling time. It could impact your commissions. So what do? You'll probably give a minimum amount of time to Bob and then get back to selling and say, oh, I helped Bob. Yeah, if he's not a good sales rep, that's his fault. I taught him everything I know and he still didn't do a good job. That unfortunately is not very productive. And so there's a way to get around that, to encourage sales reps to help each other. And by help, it might be, teaching a fellow sales rep, a more experienced sales rep, teaching a less experienced sales rep, or it might be passing referrals between different sales reps across territories. Like I heard something was happening in this other territory. It doesn't help me, but I'll pass the reference to you, the referral to you, because it'll help you. Well, people might do that if they're nice, but not everyone is nice. So we want to motivate people sales reps to support each other. So again, we have our basic salary. and we have our target. But if we see three different lines here, and let's say the first one is 2%, the second one is 4%, and the last one is 6%. These are the commission rates. And oops, sorry. And so my question is, which one do we get? Well, obviously, where you are horizontally is going to depend upon your sales performance, but which line you're going to be on will be based on the group performance. So that encourages you to help your fellow sales reps to pass referrals, to train, to clue people in on things that they could know. A great example of this was one I experienced. The product was called Agrimec. Agrimec is a I'm sorry, Zephyr. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I'm mixing up my products. Zephyr was a product. It was to help plant cotton plants, and in the this one sales rep, his territory was the San Joaquin Valley in California. If you're not familiar with that valley, it's where a lot of food is grown for the United States. It's 100 miles long. I don't remember how wide it is. I remember it was very hot. The days that I were there, it was like over 100 degrees. Obviously, it was summer. But it is often very hot there. The soil is very fertile, so there's a lot of growing that goes on. And one crop they grow there is cotton. The problem was our product needed to be applied within a 2-week window of the life cycle of the cotton plant. After something called petal fall, biological term, a botany term. But anyway, so there's a 2-week window. Now, there's no way there's a sales rep named Ron, and he worked there. There's no way Ron could get to everybody in his territory in those 2 weeks. Just not going to happen. And he had a limited window. And so what he did, and with the help of his district manager, his manager, he rented an apartment for a month, for about a month, a few weeks before the beginning of this petal fall period. And he asked for the help of his fellow sales reps in California. And these other sales reps were encouraged by the manager as well. And I visited it. It was like a dorm room. There were cots, and in the kitchen there was a big table, and it was like the kitchen was like a war room with maps and dossiers of all the customers. And okay, you go see Joe. You go see this guy. Sally, you go see these 3 people. And it was like a blitz. In fact, they called it the Cotton Blitz. And in those 2 weeks, maybe it was 3 weeks because they started before that. I think they sold $5 million worth of product. Now, those sales reps were asked to come in to give 2 or 3 days. They weren't asked to give the full 2 weeks, but they kind of rotated, so they didn't need a lot of rooms. Because I think they had a total of 10 sales reps participating in this Cotton Blitz. Now, those sales reps who came in didn't get any commission from this effort, but they knew if they could make the Cotton Blitz a success, that would raise the group performance and might put them on a higher commission rate. And so that's something you want to think about. How do you motivate a sales force? And it's not simply just a commission, but how does that commission affect them? And how can you encourage better selling behaviors and supportive behaviors by the way you structure that commission? Okay, something else that a sales rep has to manage is their time. And you want to maximize selling time. And now, as I've said previously, sales reps cost money, salary, benefits, any commissions if you're offering them. You have to train them, which has some cost. Travel expenses. You also usually give them product samples. They'll often give away a little product or at least show the product. Promotional materials. These might be brochures or what are called sales talkers. A sales talker it's something for them to hold and point to. It might have charts or diagrams or something. And any miscellaneous expenses. Certainly, they have to eat well. They have to eat well on the road. Maybe entertain. Take people out to lunch. There's a lot of that going on. Um, so, there are costs to having a sales force. So if you have a sales rep, they better pay off. They better, they better produce because they cost a lot. Uh, Also, have to look at how many sales calls can a sales rep make in a year. Now, you may say, oh, well, there's 365 days in a year. Well, yeah, but that includes weekends that people don't like to work on. I mean, occasionally people will work on weekends, but um, there are holidays, there's vacation. So actually, probably 240 days would be closer to what is realistic. And then the question is, how many sales calls can they make in a day? Now, if and salespeople do try to maximize the number of sales calls they make in a day, and so they try to schedule people who are close to them. So, for instance, if they leave their house, let's say they know on Tuesday they're going to meet some people. They try to schedule it as an example, people who live west of their house on Tuesday, and then maybe people who are north of their house on Wednesday, and east of their house on Thursday, that sort of thing. They try to have them geographically close together to reduce travel time. And the more sales reps, the more sales calls they can make in a day, the better their performance is going to be. Now, if you take the costs and divide them by the number of sales calls they make in a day, and it will vary, but I had one colleague who did a calculation. He calculated that every sales call cost the company between $200 and $300 per sales call, and they didn't save any money by keeping them home. But he just that figure worked out. That means that sales rep needs to, on average, generate the equivalent amount of profit, not the equivalent amount of sales, but to break even, they have to, again, it's kind of a break even analysis. They have to generate enough profit to match, at the very least, their cost, the cost of them going out and being a sales rep, the cost I've just listed here on the screen. So the total cost divided by the number of calls will be the cost per call, and that was the $200 to $300 figure. And again, it is going to vary for every company in every situation. And then the profit per call must exceed the cost per call. And that's an important thing, because if you can't do that, then you are losing money. And do you really need the sales rep? Now, not every sales call is going to, generate sales. It may not generate sales immediately either. Sometimes you have to make multiple calls to get the sale. So then you have to think about the number of calls being made. Is it worth it calling on that customer 2 or 3 times before getting the sale? Again, depends upon the size of the sale. So, and one of the in trying to deal with that, one of the things you do is you have to manage your customers, and by that, manage what customers you call on, and you can classify customers into groups, and every company, large company, has a variation of this, usually with letters. So your A customers, these are your top customers. They buy a lot and they buy frequently, and you want lots of A customers. But not all of your customers are going to be A customers. Some customers will buy a fair amount and somewhat often. Not quite as nice as the A customers, but still good to have. Then C customers, they buy average amounts occasionally. All right, have them. D customers rarely buy and not very much. Okay. And then you have the E customers. They buy extremely rarely, or maybe not at all. Maybe they never do. Now, the question is, where do you want to spend most of your time? I think the answer is obvious. You want to spend it on your A customers. And part of this is because we have something called you may have heard this, the 80-20 rule. Statisticians will call it the Pareto rule. And I think I may have misspelled that, I'm not sure. But the point is, 80% of your sales will come from 20% of your customers. Now, after a while, you'll know which 20% that's coming from. And this is why it's important to maintain sales records and to do analysis, customer analysis. Who's buying a lot, and you probably, I remember one company I worked at. They said, well, you probably want to meet with your A customers once a month. Maybe your B customers, 2 or 3 times a year. Maybe your C customers once a year. They're not worth as much. The D customers even less than that, and the E customers not at all. Now, there was always counter arguments here, and something you have to keep in mind. You may have somebody who's an E customer, but they might be your competitor's A customer. So the question is it worth investing in their time to switch them and become a bigger customer of yours? So these are things to consider, but in general, you want to take care of your A customers. You spend the most time with them. You never want to lose an A customer, and somewhat the same with the B customer. And you invest your time is an asset. You want to invest your time where you're going to get the biggest payoff. The D customers and the E customers are the people you call on when you just have a free time and you can't get to an A, B, or C customer. You have to manage it that way and think of it that way. Okay. All right. I hope you found this enlightening about sales. Sales is a very important field. It's a very good career path. Salespeople in one field, in one industry, can often move to another industry. If there's high levels of expertise, for instance, I don't know how many computer sales reps would move over to being pharmaceutical reps, but in many cases, you can move across industries, and that can be advantageous. And it enables you to see into a company, because sales companies are always hiring sales reps. Maybe not all at the same time, and obviously that's also subject to the economic health of the economy. But all right, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Please do the activities set up in the module, and I believe this is the sort of the last week of academic material. The following week, I believe we will have, in most cases, the following week will be our final exam. But please consult Canvas and any other communications to verify that. All right. Good luck and take care.